So I'm here tonight to visit around complex and adaptable projects, why projects fail. And what I'll do is I'll work to try to pivot this to address issues related to research, my own personal experience, and suggestions that might make sense for you as you think about your research project as a complex project. And the goal is to prevent you from failing on that. So what I'm going to try to talk about are just some very brief aspects around the anatomy of failure and a little bit related to some of the research. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, and then I want to pivot to two basic frameworks that I think are important that might help us visualize and think about what we're trying to do in different ways. One of it is the tension between living and geometric order and this notion of lean production processes and how we can use those two concepts to help us prevent failure. So if you look at the research, and it's almost independent of the industry market that you're in, you'll see that projects are not delivered meeting the client's expectations. The client is ultimately who the project is conceived for. It can use a variety of measures in terms of cost, time, quality, functionality, but most studies that have been done that have looked at this find that most projects are over budget and they take longer than they're originally scheduled. Specifically in the capital project space, what you'll find, those of you that are in civil and environmental engineering, our primary focus is on the built environment, built products, built works, whether it's roads, bridges, dams, telecommunications systems, energy distribution systems. These are all really important elements, and what you'll find is, at least in the States, a lot of these projects are done, they tend to take longer than they were originally anticipated. They tend to cost a lot more money. So some of you that are in electrical and computer engineering, you might find very similar results actually. If you think about capital projects to software and other systems that are designed that are involved in electrical engineering, what you'll find is they have very similar experience. The larger the project, the more complex it gets, the more difficult it is to meet predetermined schedule and cost outcomes. And you also then get into the challenge of the functionality and the features that are associated with that particular piece of software. There's also, in terms of the product development, so there's capital projects, there's software, and there's product development. So you might be thinking of an airplane, or it might be a car, or it might be a computer, a complete computer system that you're developing. All of those as well tend to not be designed and completed on time and on budget. So I think then the question is, why on these various endeavors, capital projects, software, and consumer products, why do they fail? So does anybody have any reaction or response? Why do you think it takes twice as long and twice as much time to complete those particular endeavors? What do you think the reason for that is? You can answer this or ask. In fact, I would say in most of the markets, the answer to the second question is, the thing I've observed is time and competition are relentless. Time and competition are relentless. And so the notion that you might want to do things in a certain way, if you're in a global marketplace, you might not have that latitude to take the amount of time that you think. You have to reduce the amount of time by a half just to beat a time to market so that you can actually be competitive. So there's tremendous pressure, time pressure, cost pressure, and competition pressure all over the world. And those are the things that many of you have experienced, but that will likely be most of your career. So some ideas that we might want to consider in terms of what are root causes for the failure. So to try to answer the question earlier, these are some things that we might want to think about. There's this tension between this notion called geometric order and living order, and I'll explain more what that means in a moment. There's this notion of shared project value and the commitment by all the project partners. So there's a big emphasis around who the client is, what's of value to them, and how is that then shared in terms of all of the partners that are participating on the project. So that would be the second one. The third one is ineffective communication. There's almost a misnomer among many engineers that they think they communicate efficiently and effectively when in fact it's not. We like to use a lot of acronyms. We like to talk around other people. And when we're involved in projects that have broad constituencies, they may not all have the same training that we do. So we might have to think differently about how we communicate key concepts so that they understand those and that they're part of the overall process. There's a lot of waste in our processes. By that means non-value added activities, things that we're doing that doesn't increase the customer value. And that's where we have to really think much more from a process point of view, and we'll talk about the lean methodology as a way to think about that. And then the last is the ability to adapt. One of the most important things in a project is the most significant independent variable is learning. There's no way on the front end of any project you can predict everything exactly the way it's going to happen. There are too many variables, too many uncontrollables. And I think this notion of being able to be adaptable, that's why this thing of thinking about being able to be flexible as the circumstances change are really, really an important concept. So what I want to do now is I want to move from setting a case for most projects fail to what the root causes are of that failure, to very basic definitions of project management, and what are the roles of high-performing, highly effective project managers. What do they do? So I want to talk about projects, project management, and what highly effective project managers do. So as we know, projects are a unique set of circumstances that exist in a context. So every one of you are working on a project on your research that is a unique combination of players, stakeholders, in addition that it's nested or founded in a context that is unique to you. And in the real world, the context is going to be something that's really, really important that one needs to think about, because that's where many of these externalities come from. They come from things that we don't see because we don't necessarily understand all those aspects. It's conceived in geometric order, but it exists in living order, and I'm going to explain again what geometric and living order is. In the most important thing is it requires leadership and management. Not just management, not just leadership, but it's a blend of the two. It's a blend of the two. So that's the projects. Project management is a process by which we're navigating all of these resources to try to achieve what the client wants to accomplish. So if you're working on a research project and you've got a committee, you're trying to navigate with your major advisor to understand how you're going to manage that group, because success is when you get everybody to sign, okay? And they say you can graduate. That's success, okay? And the question is, how do they define what those requirements are that you're going to actually have to do? And it's a highly experiential, and it's very much in terms of a unique practice. One of the most difficult things to communicate to students, I think, is that project management in and of itself is a blend of theory, but it is actual practice. Practice because you're going to do it in a particular context. You'll have theory, but all the time the theory is not going to work. So you're going to have to learn like a clinician, like a physician. Every patient is not the same. Every set of sickness conditions are not the same. It's the same thing in project management. You've got to have some sensitivities to understand your real situation, to know where you might need to be adaptable and where you might need to make changes. And then the last thing is that it's a journey of learning. I tried to make that point earlier. The most important thing on a project is that you're learning throughout that process, because you're doing things that have likely never been done before with that combination of people. And in some cases, we have to unlearn some behavior. So let's talk about the role of the project manager. And so this is based on some work that has been done by Alex Laufer, which is one of the leading authorities in the area of project management. And this was just published in the MIT Sloan magazine. And in that publication, we studied what are attributes of highly effective project managers. What do they do? What is their role in achieving success? And the first thing is that a project manager does is that they build and develop collaborations. They build relationships that enable the project to move forward, because most projects have significant number of stakeholders that are heavily involved. So building collaborations, really, really important. Another element is that to make sure that we're doing the pre-planning, that we're trying to do to the extent we can to estimate the uncertainties, to get an idea of what some of the challenges might be. So pre-planning is a very, very important function. And then the last two are really, really important, because what project managers do really is they solve problems daily. Their job is to solve problems and to maintain momentum on a project so that they can achieve success. So when you think about these four attributes of highly effective project managers, you might want to think about one day or at one moment they're the plumber. They're a plumber. The pipes are clogged and they're unclogging the pipes. The next moment they're a poet and they're thinking about the challenges and they're trying to think about how we're going to create something that's really unique, highly creative, highly challenging. So there's this tension or the way to think about that. One day you're unclogging the plumbing pipes. The next day you're really thinking in a creative way on how you're going to solve problems, how you're going to anticipate problems to move ahead. So a practical application of this for those of you that are working on your research would be is that you've got to develop collaborations with your major advisor, your committee members, and any other resources, laboratory resources that you might need. The challenge that you have is that you need to have a plan, an anticipated plan on when you want to be done. I would tell Jack and other students don't get tenure. They're to get their work done and get out, okay? So tenure means that they just don't go on and on and on. You've got to have a sense of when you're trying to finish. You have to have a targeted graduation date. You're gonna inevitably, at least my experience was, you're gonna have on any project this kind of question. You're in the middle of your research and you're gonna ask yourself, can I really do this? Is this the right thing I should be doing? You're gonna start to question yourself, and you better get that problem solved quickly and not let that continue, and keep positive momentum to get to the completion of your work. Because if not, you're going to be caught in a do loop and you're just going to go in circles, and then you're going to leave and never finish, and then you'll regret that for the rest of your life. You'll get older and you'll look back, and that'll be one thing that'll be on your bucket list that you wish you would have done, that you're going to then have to try to go back and do, that you're going to find out will be very, very difficult to do. So the purpose of this diagram here is to get you to think about, in the end, this group of four down here at the bottom, what they're doing is they're looking upstream. They're looking upstream because they're trying to figure out, instead of doing by trial and error and maybe taking their boat onto the rocks and getting hurt, they're looking backwards, scouting how they're actually going to navigate these whitewaters. So the important thing here in your research is to have in your mind where you're trying to go, and then look backwards to figure out how you're going to plan to get there. Not simply going down the rapids and hitting rocks and tearing up your boat and getting hurt. That's not the smart way to think. You want to start at the end and look backwards. That's the purpose here, to think of the strategy. Start at the end, look backwards, and then think about your plan. So let's transition from the setting up the need for there's a lot of failure to a basic understanding of projects, project management, in what effective project managers do, let's pivot to two frameworks that we can help to organize some of our thinking. One of it is to think about this notion of creative disorder, creative evolution, that talks about the tension between geometric and living order. And then the second principle or framework is the lean manufacturing or the lean methodology as a framework or an approach to actually think then about projects and how to better manage those. So Henry Bergson, which was a philosopher, a French philosopher, in his work Creative Evolution, started this basic concept of thinking about systems and how they create and recreate themselves over time. So in terms of the definition, I mentioned earlier this, one of the causes of project failure, or the root causes, deals with the tension between living and geometric order. Living order is this notion that systems to be adaptive have to make and remake themselves. Why? Because the environment and the context changes. So they have to be much more flexible and much more adaptive. So to contrast living order to geometric order, most engineers are trained to think linear, sequential, and in a very organized way. That's a good thing, but the realities are there are many, many more things that create uncertainty, that we can have a false sense of security, that we can control and predict all of these factors, when in fact it's just not true, because we just don't know enough about that particular set of information or the things that can have an influence on what we're trying to actually accomplish. So I'm not going to go through this, but you're going to have the slides you can look at. This is the basic structure that we use in the course that I teach to try to show and make the illustration between how we teach traditional project management and how that articulates this geometric order, when in fact projects live in the living order, and there's a constant tension between the geometric traditional approach and the much more adaptable approach, because projects are occurring in a living order. So let's go from living in geometric order and the work of Bergson now to think about lean management principles. And it starts by a basic understanding that this isn't a matter of doing more and more. It's actually at the base, it's a philosophy. It's thinking about what we're doing in a very fundamentally different way. There's a lot of people that continue to do without thinking. They act like technicians. They do without thinking. And this is a real fundamental long-term strategy that's really, really important. And on top of that is process, where we have to work to eliminate waste. On top of that, we've got to have the most important thing and the most important resources on projects are people and their thinking, their ability to be engaged in day-to-day problem solving and continuous improvement and learning. So these are the core principles and ideas around lean manufacturing, lean management approaches. So these are some lean management principles that can be extracted from that diagram on the prior page. The first thing is to deal with this basic notion of what is called value. Value from the perspective of the client that is asking for your help or your service. So value is a very, very important thing, because we get swept up in a lot of process-related stuff that involves doing non-value added activities, and that it's not helping us deliver a better quality product for our client. The value stream in terms of how does the work actually flow? How does the work actually get done? How could we rethink how that's being done? That's part of what I was trying to say on the earlier graphic, was think about the end where you want to be and look backwards and think about the flow of your resources. Think about the flow of your research activity. Think about where you want to end and then look backwards, see that stream and really work on the flow part, because we tend to push as opposed to pull when we're trying to perform something. So instead of having a sense of where we want to be and then pull backwards, we continue to push forward with activities. We tend to try to, if we're not making progress, we want a bigger hammer, more hammers to try to push forward. So these are some ideas that we want to think about. Perfection is an important element, continuous improvement, and the respect for people. The most important thing that we're doing in the engineering space is we're trying to improve the quality of life and the human condition. At the center is people. We use technology to provide and to help us do that. It's not to replace people. So this is a representation in terms of the organization, commercial, and the operating system. And what you'll find is in most projects, what we try to do is to break things down in a hierarchical decomposition way and then assign, we try to optimize the overall process by allocating various pieces to a larger system. And when we do that, we tend to then sub-optimize the overall performance of the system. So this is a way to think about the comparison. When I've asked over 10 years graduate engineers that are working in industry, what do they want to learn in project management? Normally what they tell you is they want to know a tool. They denote project management with a tool, typically in the context of a schedule. And in this case, if we're going to use lean and integrated approaches, then what we're trying to do is we're trying to really focus on collaboration. In the bottom, we're trying to focus on the flow. It's very, very important in terms of how the flow and the value is created. And we're really after this notion of best value. What's the, not the least cost, but what's the best value? So this is a system that's utilized in the capital projects fairly regularly. In fact, somebody that Jack knows well, Dave Tomak's building one of the largest hospitals in the United States using the last planner approach. And it's this idea, and this is applicable, you might want to think about your own research project this way, that you have a master schedule. You have a sense of when you want to be done, but then what you have to do is you've got to create phases of that. You've got to figure out the sequence or how to chunk that in a way that's more adaptable and more easy to understand some of the concepts. So then you've got a look-ahead schedule, your weekly schedule, and then your planned percent complete. And the basic notion here is that your project might be 3 years. You might have milestones in your schedule that are laid out, and like you need to get your proposal done, you need to defend your proposal, you need to get some of your scientific analysis done, you need to validate your model, you need to write your research. Those would be milestones that you would have. But you're going to be, your look-ahead schedule is going to be, I've got to get my, the next 3 weeks, what I need to do is I need to get my proposal drafted. I need to get the 20 pages written so that I can get it to my committee so that I can actually defend. And then the question is, where am I in my weekly work plan? How many pages per day do I need to write to accomplish that? And then the question here is, well, what did I actually do? So this idea of should, can, will, and did is the way that you really start to think about breaking it down to more manageable blocks or chunks that you can actually work on. So the good news is we're to the end. So this is the recommendations. So the things that you might want to think about specifically is we think about moving forward and understanding these basic project management principles is one is we need a strategy. And we've got to have the strategy and the team aligned, and they've got to be agile and adaptable to change, because it's inevitable that as much planning as you're going to do, conditions are going to change, and you're going to have to be adaptable, and you're going to have to change. And in particular, what's important here is to think about where the value is, what's the flow and the value stream look like, how are you going to really focus on the value-added processes, and then how are you going to really practice this in a way that you're going to get the collaborative capabilities that you need to succeed in your project? Well, if I had to summarize, I think that, one of the analogies that I used to use all the time with my students would be working on your PhD is like being sent out to the jungle with a pen light, trying to find your way. And that's what it's like. It can be lonely, it can be long, it can be diverse, it can be challenging, but you have to keep moving ahead. Okay, you have to keep moving ahead and learning and adapting and adjusting and taking advantage of people around you that you can learn from so that you can move forward. It's one of the most exciting experiences once you understand and you have the notion of curiosity and you have this passion of intellectual, what I'd call dexterity. You want to strengthen, you want to agile intellectually so that you can be with a sociologist, with a psychologist, with a mathematician, with a computer scientist, and not just say, here's the way I see the world, but help me understand how you see the world. That's going to help me see the world in a different way. That's really what it's about, that you have the real unique opportunity as you work on your PhD. There's nothing more liberating than unleashing your human capacity and your ability to think, your ability to conceive, your ability to discover, your ability to conceive things in different ways and see connections, see relationships. It's really, really important. And I think the big challenge, the big change that we see now is understanding the interdependencies of things, and that no one single discipline is going to solve many of the major problems that we have. Okay, the world doesn't have disciplines. The world has challenges and problems. And they need people that can think differently and work collaboratively in different ways and see it differently, because that's how we're going to get the best solutions, the best technology, the best policy, not simply engineers and or one particular field has all the answers, because it's not likely going to work that way. At least that's my experience. So I've really enjoyed my time together. I'm very excited to be here. I'll be glad to stay afterwards if you have any further questions, and I wish all of you your best of luck as you pursue your research endeavors and become PhDs. So thank you.